All right, it's time for us to get started tonight. Everybody having a good Sunday?
Yes, sir.
Good, good. I like to hear it. It's been a good day. I cannot complain. Did anybody watch the show growing up, Undercover Boss? Or not growing up? I guess that's me. Watch the show, Undercover Boss? Anybody? My bad. Man, rough start already. I love that show growing up, right, when I was a kid. I loved watching that show because there's just something special about it, right? For those of you who haven't seen the show, it's pretty simple to explain. There's a company and there's a CEO who wants to make their company better, right? But all the CEOs and CFOs, COOs, owners, employees in this room know that it's virtually impossible to get your employees to open up about bad management, poor company decisions, problems when you're the one giving them the paycheck at the end of the day, right? There's some problems with that. They're not going to be completely honest. And so what the show does is they dress up the CEO or whoever it might be, the owner, give them a disguise, a new identity, and they place him at the bottom of the food chain, right? And so he'll go from the top of the company down to the very bottom. And so there's a shock factor that comes with that, right? Seeing the guy whose name is on the building lease sweeping the floor in the factory. I love seeing that. Now, obviously, the show, there's some reality TV show elements to it, right? There's probably some scripted moments in it. But that show teaches us a lot about the CEO or the owner or whoever it might be. You see somebody at the top of the business going down to the bottom. Why? Because they have a love for their company and a love for their employees. They're willing to sacrifice their time, their energy to do some stuff that, frankly, that no one wants to do. The stuff at the very bottom of the food chain, right? And what it shows is they're true servants. That they're truly humble when they do that. Who does that sound a lot like? It sounds a lot like Jesus, right? It sounds like our God Jesus who came to this earth. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight as we're trying to become more and more like Jesus, right? That's the objective of this class, is to look at Jesus and copy and paste into our life. To day in, day out, become more and more like Him. And so what better thing to talk about tonight than service? Because Jesus' life is certainly trademarked by that fact, right? I think about what Jesus says in Matthew 20 and verse 28. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. Jesus had the heart of a servant. It was one of His defining features. He served. He served a lot of people. I think about Jesus serving the sick, right? We talked about this in the prayer class, didn't we? We see Jesus slipping away in the evening and slipping away in the morning. Why? What's His afternoon full of? Healing and teaching, right? He's being a servant. We see Jesus healing over and over again. I love this prophecy by Isaiah. In Isaiah 35, 5 through 6. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. And certainly Jesus did fulfill that prophecy. His life is full of just Him healing and serving the sick. I think about Mark chapter 1. Who does Jesus heal in Mark chapter 1? Anybody know? Top of their head? I'm willing to be cleansed. Anybody? Sound familiar? The leper. He heals the leper in Mark chapter 1. He says, Lord, if you're willing, make me clean. And Jesus says, I am willing. He stretches out and touches him, right? He heals the leper. I think about Jesus in Matthew 8. He heals Peter's mother-in-law. Matthew 9, the paralytic, the woman, the mute man. In Mark chapter 5, one of my favorite Bible stories, Jesus sails across the sea, and who does He find? A legion, a demonic man, right? And He heals him. He saves someone who everyone else counted off, or who everyone who looked down on. Jesus' life was full of Him healing. But also Jesus served the crowds, didn't He? Not only did Jesus heal the sick, but He also served the crowds. Matthew 14, Matthew 15, what happens there? He feeds a lot of people, doesn't He? In Matthew 14 and Matthew 15, Jesus serves a lot of people in a lot of various ways, doesn't He? The apostles come to Him and they say, Jesus, we don't have food. The sun is setting. Businesses are closing. Send these people away and we'll just start back up tomorrow. But what does Jesus do? He says, no, I got this. And He serves them. He produces a miracle. But also, and most importantly, Jesus served those who are spiritually lost. And He taught. He taught the lost of this world, and that was service. Jesus answered questions. He answered questions from people like the apostles, right? Jesus, what does this mean? And Jesus would spend his time, he'd spend his energy, and he'd answer them. But also he had to answer some tough questions from people like the Pharisees and Sadducees, right? They're trying to trip him up, get him to make a mistake, and Jesus would serve because he would answer them, he would teach them, and he'd serve others. And most importantly, he came to serve us and to die on the cross for our sins. He came to serve the lost. And so if we're going to be like Jesus, which is the point of this class, to look more and more like him, how can we not talk about service, right? Because this is the life of Jesus. He was a servant. And so next class, we're going to talk about obstacles. We're going to say, okay, these are some things that are going to keep us from serving like Jesus, right? And we're also going to look at specific ways we can serve. But this class, all I want to do, and this is what I love to do, is just go to one text, look at it, look how Jesus serves, and get some lessons for us. Where are we going to go if we're going to talk about Jesus and service? Where he washes the disciples' feet. I love that. Turn there with me. John chapter 13. John chapter 13. I wish Carrie was here. I don't see him yet. I've been talking to Mr. Carey about this class and my thoughts and what he thinks. And I mean, he's giddy about John chapter 13. He loves it. And he told me, Carson, you've got to tell them the context of this chapter. And I think he's exactly right. And so let me set the stage. John chapter 13. If you just want to flip through your Bibles, you can kind of look at the other chapter title headings. And you see something really interesting, right? So John 12, John 13, they're in the upper room. And they're going to be there till John chapter 18. This is going to be the upper room where Jesus institutes the Lord's Supper, where they're going to have this encounter with Jesus where he washes their feet. But when they leave the upper room, where do they go? The garden. And from garden, where is Jesus going to go? To be tried and then eventually executed on the cross. And so John 12 through 18, they're in the upper room. John 18, they're in the garden. John 19, we're at the crucifixion scene. And so notice, these are the last hours of Jesus. These are the final lessons he is giving his apostles and he's giving us before he's going to leave this earth and be with the Father again, as he'll talk about in John chapter 13. But let's look a little bit deeper at the context. The apostles, all 12 of them, are gathered in this room. That's really important. All 12 of them are there. And this would be the feast where Jesus would establish the Lord's Supper. But things are already in motion, aren't they, for the crucifixion process? Because who's going to betray Jesus? Judas. Judas, as we learn in John chapter 13, is already determined in his heart. He's going to sell out Jesus, right, for some silver. And so things are already in motion. But then during the feast, Jesus stops and he does something. So read with me, John chapter 13. Man, I'm not there. John chapter 13. And let's start reading in verse 1. John 13, beginning in verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. During the supper, the devil having already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Verse 5. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. So he came to Simon, Peter, and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash your feet, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but wash also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. Verse 11, For he knew the one who was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. Jesus, while he's in this upper room, he washes the disciples' feet. It wasn't the ambitious Peter. It wasn't the ambitious Peter who looked at this need, that he looked at, hey, no one's washed our feet yet, and said, hey, Lord, I got this. This one's on me. It wasn't the sons of thunder. the ambitious sons of thunder, who looked at this need and said, we got this one, Jesus, we'll wash the feet. But who is it? It's Jesus, the Lord, God of the universe, who gets down on the ground and he washes the disciples' feet. And Jesus tells us why he did this. Jesus gives this example so that we can see that, hey, we're expected to serve, right? Verse 14, it says, if I then, speaking of Jesus, the Lord and teacher, washed your feet, you also are to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example that you should also do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who sent me greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. The reason Jesus washed the disciples' feet is because Jesus wants to teach us a very important lesson that is essential. If we're going to be disciples of Jesus, if our life is going to look like him, then there has to be an element of service involved. He's teaching that it's impossible. It is impossible to be like him if we don't have the mindset of the God who wore the towel when he washed the disciples' feet. Jesus teaches us that service is expected from his disciples. And so I just want to look at this text tonight and also Matthew 6 because I think Jesus explains it there a little bit better, right? I just want to look at this text and come up with a few lessons, a few things that we can take away as we just try to look like Jesus and we try to serve, all right? And so if you have comments, if you have questions, I love to hear it. That's what I love. And so if you have anything that comes to your mind, and share it with us, all right? So here's a couple lessons from John chapter 13. The first is this. In John chapter 13, we learn that service is expected despite our position, right? This is probably the most obvious lesson from John chapter 13. Who is it that washes the disciples' feet? Jesus, right? What does Peter call him? My ears I'm getting a little bit older. I can't hear anything. Rabbi, right? He calls him Rabbi. What else? Lord. That's the one I have in my translation. Jesus and Peter encounter and he says, Lord. Why does Peter call Jesus Lord? Why not teacher, rabbi, master? What's so significant about Lord?
He's God.
He's God. He's deity in the flesh. And what's he doing? He's washing the disciples' feet, right? There's something really important, really impactful from that. It reminds me of how John would begin his gospel in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was the life, and the life was the light of men. When Peter says, Lord, he's saying, John chapter 1, 1 through 4, that this is God, the creator of the universe. But whose job was washing feet? It was the servant, right? And as I did some research this week, just in preparation for this lesson, I actually found that it's not even just the servant's job, but it's pretty much the lowest servant's job. It's the intern, the bottom of the food chain, right? One commentator says this: not only do servants draw water, wash the feet, and dispose of the water, but it appears that a slave could not refuse to render this service. No matter how old he or she might be, foot washing could be used as a synonym for slavery. To wash another's feet symbolized subjugation of one person to another. Those who received foot washing from one another were social superiors of those who performed the task. Long story short, all that's trying to say is if you wash someone's feet, you're putting yourself under them, right? You're demonstrating that, hey, you're over me and I'm under you. And so do we see the significance of what Jesus is doing? A lot of times the apostles have really bad reactions, right? Can anyone think of a bad reaction, a bad moment of the apostles?
Yes, Peter.
Peter, right?
Cutting off Malchus's ear.
Yeah, he cuts off an ear, right? That's a really bad reaction, right? And Jesus has to do some damage control, right? I love that. What else?
Send down some fire.
I was thinking that with the sons of thunder, right? Hey, Lord, let's call down some fire on these people. And Jesus says, no, that's not what we're going to do, right? What else? Any others that come to your mind?
Arguing about who's the greatest.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that next class, right? We talk about some obstacles to service because the context is really interesting, right? When we think about what prompted this. The disciples, as Jesus is about to die on the cross for the sins of mankind, they're arguing, all right, who's the greatest in the kingdom, right? I think about when the children were with Jesus and they're saying, hey, let's get rid of these kids, right? And Jesus says, no, what are you doing, right? The apostles and disciples have some really bad reactions. Did Peter have a bad reaction when Jesus washed his feet? We might say yes, but I kind of have to side with Peter on this one, right? You have the Lord of the universe washing your feet, and he says, "What are you doing, Jesus? Get up, don't wash my feet," right? It's a perfectly justified response, which Jesus is going to use to teach him a lesson, right? But Peter is saying, "Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you washing my feet? You're deity. You're Lord. You're King of the universe. Why are you putting yourself under me?" I got to side with Peter on that one. I think this is a perfectly justified response. And I don't know if we can appreciate what Jesus is doing because we live in a Western culture, right? It's hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes and this servant mindset, right? Because, we might look at a CEO taking out the trash or something, and the news will look at him and say, he's doing a great thing, right? We don't have as much social status as some other countries do, or do things that emulate the time that they were in, right? But Jesus washing the disciples' feet is something that people would have looked at and laughed. They would have said, "No way, Jesus, no way can you do that, because you're destroying your reputation, you're destroying your image, you're destroying your social status," right? People in your position don't do that, Jesus. That's the normal. But Jesus does anyway, right? And so it's kind of hard for us to get it, but again, we can try. We can think about, someone like Elon Musk, taking out the trash. We can think about Bill Gates, sweeping the floor, or Gordon Ramsay washing the dishes, right? Or something like that. We can try to grasp what Jesus is doing, but it's almost impossible for us to fully. Jesus, the Lord of the universe, is putting himself in the position of a servant. And so that teaches us a really powerful lesson, doesn't it? That our service cannot be dependent on our position, right? That service is expected despite our position. We may be an owner or a CEO. We may be very successful in life. You may find yourself as a parent, right, over your children. You may find yourself rich or popular or successful, whatever it might be. But what Jesus teaches us is, hey, the title on the door, the accomplishment by your name, I got you in a second. The accomplishment by your name, whatever it might be in your life, cannot dictate whether you serve someone or not. Yeah, Matt, what you got?
So there's some principles of Christianity that the culture does not support much, but this is one that the culture just in general applauds. I'm thinking like President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Yeah.
I'm seeing him everywhere. People saying this is a true leader because he could have ran away, like I think the Afghani leader did when things started happening, but he's sitting here putting on fatigues and taking videos in the heart of Kiev. And I think that's a great example of that leadership.
Well, and I just think about being a disciple. It could be very easy for Jesus not to do this, for God never to show acts of mercy and love and kindness, right? He has every right to do that, acts of service. But you're right, a true leader, when you see this, man, I want to follow Jesus when I see him washing the disciples' feet, because I know his heart when he does that. I want to follow him. So that's a great lesson for leadership in life, right? If we want to be leaders, especially here in the church, right? The epistles are going to, every time they talk about leadership, they talk about servants. And they talk about a servant heart, right? And so you can notice that trend in the epistles. Hit me up.
Well, and also people are commenting like Putin's sort of sitting back and, he's not leading, whereas you have Zelensky, for instance, he's leading and going out front.
Yeah, leading by example of. Yeah, I like that. Real world. I've been watching the news like crazy, trying to figure out what's going on over there. And so I like that example. Go ahead.
You brought the example, too, of the disciples here and their reaction.
Yeah.
And from that perspective, when we think of our position, too, as we're called to serve, we're also to receive service from others. And if we translate this, today, over here, washing feet wouldn't be something we typically do. And if we put ourselves in their position to ask somebody, would you literally allow someone else to wash your feet? Like, a lot of us have a thing about, like, no one's touching my feet.
Yeah, I'm one of those people, all right?
And we also have an attitude of, I'm fine. I don't need anybody's help. And we hold people at a distance. And that breaks the cycle. That doesn't allow people to get close to us. That doesn't allow people to serve us and as a result show love to us in the way that Jesus is showing love to his disciples here.
I love that lesson. And when I was trying to pick and choose where I was going to go with that, I pretty much had to cut that out. But that's the point of Jesus, the lesson that it teaches through Peter, right? And Peter's reaction is, so we got to accept it, right? I love that. Go ahead.
In Africa, in the rural areas, we've often seen people walk 8 miles to come to work.
Wow, that is a lot of walking. Living here in Tampa, it's made me spoiled, because back in Birmingham, we'd have to drive 30, 40 minutes to get to service, and, going to FC or just living right around the neighborhood. It takes me 2 minutes to get here, right? I'm spoiled, right? So we don't appreciate that. But it takes work, it takes service. I love that. And so we have to realize that, and I love your comments, by the way, that despite our position, right, we need to serve. And I'd also add to this point, I didn't give it a box, but I probably should have. A lack of position shouldn't cause us not to serve as well. Jesus very easily, as the apostles did, could have said, where's the servant? We're waiting on the servant to get here to do this job, right? And sometimes I think we can get the same mindset of, because we aren't in a position that we say, I'm going to let them serve. I'm going to let them do that job, right? Maybe we're here at church and we see a need, right? And we're going to talk about that next class. Specific ways we can serve, especially in the body. We see a need and we say, well, I'm not an elder, I'm not a deacon, and so I don't want to step on toes, I don't want to do that. And because we're not in a position, we don't serve. Or maybe it's some other type of service in our life. Maybe we see another family, but we say, oh, their kids got this, right? They can help them, or their parents can help them, right? Because we're not in a position, then we don't serve. So there's some lessons that's lesson number 1. Took too long on that. This is number 2. This is what Jesus teaches us through John chapter 13, that service is not expected, that our service is expected despite our circumstances. This is probably going to be the briefest lesson that I see in John chapter 13. But as I was just thinking about this chapter this week, this is one that convicted me the most, and I think it carries the most weight in this entire lesson tonight. Read with me John chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. And maybe I have it on the screen. Oh, yeah, I do. John chapter 13, 1 through 4. Now the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, the devil, having already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come forth from the Father and was going back to God, he got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, taking a towel, and he girded himself, and the text would go on to describe him washing the disciples' feet. What's on Jesus' mind before he does this?
But the end is near.
The end is near. It's the end of the road, right? What is this hours before? We talked about it setting up this context. What is this hours before?
Betrayal.
Betrayal. Trial. Crucifixion. Right? That's where we're heading in John chapter 19. This is hours before Jesus would be sweating in the garden. Lord, take this cup from me. So was Jesus' mind at ease in this moment here at the feast? No. He's thinking about things to come. He's thinking about the end, as you said, Mr. Hines. I don't know if we could say Jesus was nervous. I don't know if we could go that far, but we could definitely say that Jesus understood what was coming. He understood that what he was about to bear on the cross, right? Like we talked about in the communion meditation this morning, that he is about to bear to the fullest extent the pain that we all deserve on the cross. He knows that's coming. But what does that not dictate? His service, right? I think there's a great lesson in that, and one that we can't let circumstance dictate our serving. Some days can be pretty tough, right? I've talked about that in this class and the few I've taught, that being an adult is hard, right? I'll admit it every single time. It gets harder and harder every week. There's things that come up, days are long. I still don't know how you all do it with kids, all right? I mean, it looks exhausting. Days are hard. Amen. Times are hard. Hey. Amen? I did not, don't tell Jamie about that. Days are hard, right? And so what's it easy to do when we look at a need, where we look at a way we can serve after a long day, a hard week, when we're just going through it in life?
Make an excuse.
Make an excuse. I love that. What else? Maybe that's really the only
Expect
answer.
someone else to do it.
I love that. We expect someone else to do it.
It's much easier to not let it become a part of our character,
Mhm.
but allow it to be just a practice we do when we feel we can.
Yeah, I love that in my notes. We can never say, unless my life is good, my batteries are at 100%, then and only then I can serve, right? I love those answers, right? We look at a need, right? We see those dishes piling up. I live in an apartment now, so I'm experiencing dishes, and they are evil, right? Paper plates all the way. We see those dishes piling up, and we walk in, and man, we've had a long day at work. You know, the car broke down, whatever it might be. It's just been a long day. And we see him and we say, the roommate's got him today. I'm done with it, right? You know, it could be anything in life. It's very easy to look at our circumstance and make excuses because my day isn't going great, because life isn't perfect, then I'm not going to serve, right? And now, I don't want to undermine taking days for ourselves. I think that's really important. I think the Bible teaches that there are some days where we need to sit back, be still, and know that He's God, and work on ourselves and rest and relax. But we can never get in that mindset of unless my life is perfect, unless this situation goes away completely, 100%, then and only then can I serve, right? I think it's a really powerful lesson. Are there any more comments on that? Go ahead.
Just real quick, oftentimes it's through our pain that we are then able to help others with their burdens.
Mhm.
And that is the hardest time to be of service, because you have to relive what you've already gone through.
Yeah, I love that. And Jesus is a great example of that too.
I was also thinking like, the other way around too. You know, maybe it's that, we're extremely blessed, or like Jesus saying, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than, camel entering the eye of the needle. Sort of the other way around, where it's like, you're too good off and you're focused on yourself and enjoying the pleasures and stuff like that, and you neglect others.
Yeah, I love that too, because we're gonna talk about that when it comes to obstacles, right? Because what are the disciples doing? Why aren't they washing feet? Well, it's because they're talking about who's the greatest, And so there's a great lesson in that. A lot of times we can become so focused on other things that we can just have a complete neglect. I think about the book of Amos. If you got time this week, read the book of Amos. It talks about how there's all these poor people, these people in need, and these people have become so focused on themselves. That's why God's bringing judgment against them, right? Because they only care about themselves. And so that's a great lesson, right? And from the book of Amos. Any other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Carson, you mentioned a while ago, we're leading up to the crucifixion, right? And I believe in a very real sense, the crucifixion is the greatest act of service that Jesus performed for us. And it's when we view the crucifixion and we have to humble ourselves at that time, that's when we're willing to help others and to serve others. And that's what keeps us willing to help others, to serve others, is viewing the cross, crucifixion of Christ.
Yeah, well, it's just like Jonathan talked about this morning. When we think of what God's done for us, right? I mean, it just causes so many reactions and causes so much emotion, right? So when we think about Jesus, serving us to the very end of His life, how can we not pick up trash, for someone? How can we not see, a spouse or a neighbor in need and do something for them when Jesus, He served us, by going to the cross? I love that. Anything else? Go ahead.
Sometimes when you have a position where you can serve, you debate whether you should do it. But the amazing thing is, if you go ahead with it and help that person, it's almost selfish. It's such a great joy and reward that you get from serving.
Yeah. No, it is. It's amazing when we serve how much it impacts us, not only the individual, right? And Paul talks a little bit about that as well. We'll talk about that next class. Is there another hand?
I was just going to mention one other thing. Because I was piggybacking off of what he was saying about maybe we don't actually notice what the impact of that service is for the other person, because maybe we've never been there before in their shoes. So we almost don't have enough empathy to say, okay, this is very important for this person that I be there, or that I sit with them, for 5 or 15 minutes and just chat with them. So maybe we talk ourselves out of it a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we've never been in their position.
Yeah, I love that. We'll never know the effect we have on someone. That's a really good comment. I think about so many people that I just encountered in high school that just had a terrible life. I mean, straight up awful life. And I think about moms coming up to me, and this is nothing on me, just being a normal, good kid. I talk to them, and their moms would come up to me after and say, "You made my kid's day," right? And that's just me talking to them, right? Doing just what I do normally. So you never know how great of an impact you can have on someone. I think that's a really good comment, right? We got to keep moving. Next lesson I see from Jesus is the discomfort. And we've talked a little bit about this, and so I'll kind of glance over my notes here for just a little, or just skim through my notes here just a little bit. But Jesus also teaches us in John chapter 13 that we got to serve regardless of the discomfort, regardless of the pain. John chapter 13 and verse 4, is it up there? Let's go. Jesus got up from the supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. While the act of washing feet symbolized submission, right? We talked about this. This was something that was diminishing, something that people could have looked at him and ridiculed him for, something that may have destroyed his credibility. But it also had a very physical element to it, right? It's kind of nasty. It was dirty. He had to get on the ground and wash the disciples' feet. There was awkwardness to it. He had to remove his outer garments and wash the feet with the towel in which he was girded. So the task was discomforting, but the discomfort didn't stop Jesus from serving. And when we think about the life of Jesus, right, this is a theme, and I love this theme. Discomfort never stopped Jesus, right? And the way he served, he did it to show us that. I think about the leper. How did Jesus heal the leper? In Mark chapter 1. He touched him. People would have said, Jesus, you can't touch him. That he's nasty, he's dirty. And Jesus, he touches him. He did it despite the discomfort. I think about the blind man. Jesus had to put mud on his face, right? Jesus takes some clay and he gets dirty and he puts the mud on his face. There was some discomfort in that. I think about the demonic man, and maybe that's the one that stands out to me the most. You have this demonic man. Nobody wants to get around this guy. Why? Because he's dangerous. He's taking chains, he's ripping them apart. Nobody wants to get around the guy living in the tomb. So Jesus, a Jew, sails into a Gentile territory. That's already discomforting enough. And then he goes to a man that no one wants to be around, and he heals him, right? But Jesus is showing us in all these examples that he's willing to serve despite the circumstance, but not only that, despite the discomfort that he would bring upon himself in serving. And so what does this lesson mean for us if we're going to serve like Jesus? It means we got to be like the CEO on Undercover Boss, right? We got to be willing to do the dirty, to do the jobs that make us uncomfortable, to put action behind our words, right? Maybe that means we got to help somebody move on Saturday, right? There's always that text going out, and I love that. I love seeing brethren ask brethren to come help them move. I think that's special. Maybe we got to do that some Saturday morning. Maybe you look out and you see some mom and dad, and they've got kids, and they're exhausted, and you see that, and you think, okay, maybe I can watch their kids for a day and let them get some alone time, right? And that's exhausting, right? Like I said, kids, crazy, man. That's exhausting, right? Maybe we got to do that. Maybe we got to serve here at the building. Maybe we got to do something really uncomfortable, really bad. Maybe we got to sit on the other side of the auditorium, sit with someone all alone, right? Maybe we got to do something that gets us out of our comfort zone, right? And so we need to serve like Jesus in that regard. I got 3 questions on your handout that I think are essential to doing this and really pierced my heart as I thought this week, do I fit this description? Am I serving out of my comfort zone? Am I serving like Jesus and despite the discomfort? Here's the 3 questions. Have I recently served when others wouldn't? Have I recently served when others wouldn't? Am I like Jesus with that demonic man? Everybody has written him off. Everybody has said, too hard, no way, I'm not doing it. Have I, like Jesus, served when others wouldn't? Second question is, have I done something recently that took me out of my comfort zone? Have I touched a leper like Jesus? Something that his people would have said, don't do it, Jesus. This isn't the normal. This isn't right. Am I doing something that gets me out of my comfort zone? Maybe you're an introvert, and maybe that means talking to somebody who's all alone at church, right? Maybe you're an extrovert, and maybe on the flip side of that, maybe it means listening. Maybe it means having a meaningful conversation. That's where I struggle, right? Maybe it means I ask someone how they're doing spiritually. And maybe that means an awkward conversation. Maybe that means a long conversation, right? But I do it because it takes me outside of my comfort zone. Maybe I can serve in that way. But the third one's this. Have I grown weary in doing good? Turn over to Galatians. Turn over to Galatians if you have your Bible. We're going to talk about this more next class, because this is such a great text. But Galatians chapter 6. Read with me Galatians chapter 6. in verse 9. Galatians 6 and verse 9. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap a reward if we do not grow weary. So then while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who are in the household of faith. I was doing a Devo on that text with the junior high kids here at TT, and actually I was doing it with college kids, and Truth Clevenger happened to be there. And we were talking about how we don't need to grow weary, how we need to do good deeds, and we need to serve. And Truth looked at me and he said, man, I just had this thought. Have I ever grown weary in doing good? We need to ask ourselves, have I ever reached that point where I have grown weary in doing good? Have I ever reached that point of discomfort where I am tired, where I am exhausted, where I am having to exert myself, right, and sacrifice my time and my energy? Have I grown weary in doing good? I think that's a great question if we're trying to serve like Jesus. Wow, that is a really long transition. Another one's this. If we're going to serve like Jesus, we need to serve despite a lack of recognition. This actually comes from Matthew chapter 6, if you want to turn over there. We could get this from John 13, but I think it'd be way easier if we did it from Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, if you remember, this is a passage we read when we talked about prayer and our motivation for prayer, right? And having a heart that is prepared to pray and pray in the way which Jesus wants us to. But look at what we read, but now speaking about service and kindness and goodness. Matthew 6, beginning in verse 1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. And so when you give to the poor, when you do good deeds, when you serve, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so they may be honored by men. Truly, truly, I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving, your service, your kindness, your good deeds will be in secret. And your Father sees what is done in secret. He will reward you. Jesus wants to serve in a way that it doesn't matter if we're recognized or not for what we do. That it's not dependent on being recognized, on being seen, on being honored. I love this quote. There's a text. The quote says, although Christians are to be seen doing good works, they must not do works simply to be seen. Well, that's a pretty simple quote, right? Those are profound words. We should never do something to be seen. That's what Jesus teaches us about service. And that's what his life teaches us about service. I think about when Jesus healed the 10 lepers. Jesus heals 10 lepers. How many come back and say, thank you? 1. That story teaches me that Jesus' service, his miracles, his teaching aren't dependent on thank you. They're not dependent on being honored. And we see that over and over again in the gospel. Jesus doing these things and not receiving the praise he deserves. You know, I was just thinking before the class started, how many thank yous does Jesus deserve? And I kept thinking, and probably about 100 billion, right? That's people estimate, the lived on the earth. Jesus went to the cross, and he died for man. And if his service was dependent on recognition, well, it wouldn't happen, right? Because out of 100 billion, I can't imagine very many have said thank you in that number. As Jesus would say, there are few who find it. There are few who recognize him as Lord and give him the credit that he deserves. And so Jesus teaches us that our service is expected despite a lack of recognition. Are there any thoughts about that before we move on? It's pretty straightforward. We can't serve because we're going to thank you. We can't serve because we're honored. Here's the last one that I'll give you guys tonight. You can take with you. We got to serve despite the recipient. We got to serve despite the recipient. Let's read John chapter 13 again. Turn back over there. John chapter 13. This will be the last one we make from this text. Got about 5 minutes left. John chapter 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come into this world to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them till the end. During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that the hour right, that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from the supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter, and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What I do you do not realize now, but you will understand hereafter. Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not only wash my feet, but also wash my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. Verse 11, For he knew one of them was betraying him. For this reason he said, Not all of you are clean. Verse 12, So when he had washed their feet, and we'll stop there. There's a really profound lesson in John chapter 13. And it's that Jesus served despite the recipients, right? This one's kind of obvious. We see Judas the liar. The only title I could come up with for this is undeserving much. When you think about who's in the room, who's Jesus serving, right? You have Judas the liar. I think about John 13 when it says, I'm telling you before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. And he's speaking of Judas, right? Jesus knows what's going to happen. Judas is going to leave this room. He's going to sell him out. But what does Jesus do? He serves him. Even though Judas is going to be the one who sets everything in motion for Jesus to receive pain and anguish, to be mocked and ridiculed, he's going to love him and he's going to serve him. Right? But there's also some other people in that room that I think about. I think about Peter the denier. You know, we can be hard on Judas sometime, but I think Peter does some terrible things to Jesus in those hours that would follow that night as well. Jesus says in John 13 and verse 38, after he's talked about Judas, he said, hey, there's one that's going to betray me. He says this about Peter. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I say to you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And what happens? Is Jesus lying? No. Peter's, in the hours to come, is going to deny Jesus. Peter's one of those inner circle guys. He's one of the few men who could say and they know Jesus the way only a few could. Jesus stretched out his hand and saved him when he was sinking in water. He healed his mother-in-law. Jesus taught him, right? They had that great moment when he said, I will build my church, right? That's Peter. Well, then what does Peter do? His inner circle guy. He denies him. He says, I don't even know that guy, right? And Jesus needed his followers the most. But what does Jesus do? He serves him. He washes the disciples' feet. And the last one I have on there is the apostles and runners. John would say in his gospel, John 14 and verse 15, then all his disciples deserted him and ran away. His people, the people that had followed him, the people that Jesus loved, as he would say in John 13, they all ran away at the face of Jesus dying on the cross. But Jesus washes their feet. And so what's the lesson there for us? It doesn't matter who it is. It does not matter if they've wronged us. It doesn't matter if they're untrustworthy, and they will wrong us, right? Now, we have to use wisdom. We have to use discernment, right? The Bible teaches that. But we should never let the recipient dictate our service. We can't let bitterness of the past dictate the reality of the present, that we are disciples of Jesus and disciples serve. All right, that's the class. Any other comments before we end? Cool. All right, I'll see y'all Wednesday. Thank y'all.